The air in the executive platinum VIP lounge at Léopold Sédar Senghor International Airport in Dakar wasn't just thick with the scent of wealth and privilege, it crackled with it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, felt the familiar, almost physical weight of his responsibilities, even in this unexpected interlude. He was grounded, quite literally. A last-minute technical issue with the smaller, more agile aircraft typically used for his regional travel had necessitated a switch to a commercial flight connection, a rare occurrence, and one that now found him caught in a frustrating web of cascading delays. He sat in an armchair that felt slightly too soft, the luxuriousness a stark contrast to the often Spartan conditions he encountered in his work. Traoré himself had deliberately chosen to dress down, a simple, dark, unbranded jacket over a plain, dark shirt, comfortable trousers, no flashy watches, no obvious symbols of power. He craved, just for a few hours, a sliver of anonymity, a moment free from the relentless gaze of the world. He held a worn paperback, a dense volume on post-colonial theory, attempting to immerse himself in its intellectual challenges. But the sheer volume and nature of the conversations around him made it a struggle. Near Traoré, this dynamic was on full, irritating display. A group of 4 individuals had carved out their territory, their voices carrying effortlessly across the lounge. There was Marcus, the alpha, his expensive suit struggling to contain a physique built more on lavish dining than physical exertion. His face was florid, his laughter a booming sound that demanded attention. His wrist bore the weight of a watch that likely cost more than the annual income of many Burkina citizens. Beside him was Bernard, lean and sharp-featured, with eyes that seemed to constantly appraise and dismiss. His movements were precise, his tone clipped. The woman, Sylvie, was a study in designer labels and cultivated ennui, her thin face set in an expression of perpetual mild offense. Her voice was a high, reedy instrument of complaint. Completing the quartet was Julian, younger, his arrogance less earned than inherited, expressed through smirks, eye rolls, and condescending remarks. Their conversation was a relentless, loud performance of their own importance and dissatisfaction. "I simply cannot fathom this level of incompetence," Sylvie declared, her voice rising in pitch as she gestured with a delicate hand. "Our connection in Lisbon is critical. Do these people understand the value of our time?" Traoré, despite his efforts to remain absorbed in his book, found his attention increasingly drawn to their performance. He was no stranger to arrogance, to the condescension of those who viewed his nation, his continent, his youth, as signs of backwardness or weakness. He decided to move, find a quieter corner, perhaps near the windows, away from their grating voices. He stood up from the armchair, his movements calm and deliberate. As he did, Marcus, mid-story and gesturing wildly, swung his arm out with even more force than before, his elbow connecting sharply with Traoré's ribs. It was more than a jostle. It was a definite, dismissive shove, as if clearing an obstacle from his path. "Watch it, buddy," Marcus snapped, turning with an immediate, angry frown. He didn't offer an apology. His eyes, already narrowed with irritation, swept over Traoré's simple clothing, the lack of a flashy watch, the worn book. His frown deepened into a look of open contempt. "Honestly, people need to be more aware of their surroundings. This isn't a cattle market. If you can't handle a bit of space, maybe you shouldn't be in a place like this," Julian snickered, his eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "Yeah, careful not to spill your—" "Whatever that is," he added, nodding towards Traoré's book, implying it was something cheap or insignificant. "Wouldn't want to ruin the upholstery." Traoré stopped. He stood perfectly still, absorbing the insult, the open mockery. He met Marcus's gaze directly, his own eyes calm, steady, holding the weight of command that few in this room could ever comprehend. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lose his composure. "I believe you owe me an apology," Traoré said, his voice low, measured, but carrying an undeniable authority that seemed to momentarily surprise Marcus. Marcus blinked, his bluster faltering for a fraction of a second. This wasn't the reaction he expected from someone in simple clothes. He expected mumbled apologies, averted eyes. He quickly regained his arrogance, his face hardening. "An apology?" he scoffed, turning back to his group with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if Traoré were an annoying fly. "For what? For you walking into my personal space? Please. Some people really have an inflated sense of self-importance." Julian chuckled, louder this time, sharing a look with Bernard and Sylvie. Maybe he thinks being able to read makes him important, he sneered. Stick to the complimentary snacks, pal. That's probably more your speed. Sylvie added her sharp, nasal voice to the chorus of dismissal. Honestly, the audacity. Just ignore him, Marcus. Some people just crave attention. Probably never been in a place like this before. Traore felt a deep, cold weariness settle over him. It wasn't about the personal insult. It was about the casual, ingrained belief in their own superiority. The way they dehumanized anyone they deemed beneath them. Aid workers, people who couldn't afford expensive clothes, people who read books they didn't understand, all dismissed, categorized, and mocked from their gilded perch. He looked at them, pampered, loud, utterly blind to the world outside their bubble of wealth. He saw not just rudeness, but a profound moral emptiness. He would not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. He would not engage further. He turned away from the group, his back straight, his movements controlled. He walked towards the lounge's service counter, where the young staff members were struggling to keep up. Fatu, the trainee, looked close to tears, fumbling with a coffee order, her name tag practically screaming her inexperience. Omar, the other young man, was rushing between tasks, his face flushed with stress, clearly new and overwhelmed by the constant demands and impatient glares. They were trying their best, but they were clearly out of their depth in this high-pressure environment. Traore felt a pang of sympathy for them. Traore approached Omar, who was frantically trying to restock a tray of pastries. "Excuse me," Traore said, his voice calm and polite, waiting for Omar to look up. "Could I please have a glass of water?" Omar glanced at him, his eyes darting quickly over Traore's simple clothes. He didn't recognize the face that was known in presidential palaces and international forums. He saw just another passenger, one among dozens of demanding faces. He mumbled a distracted, "Yeah, sure, 1 second." His attention already fragmented. Before Omar could even turn towards the water cooler, Marcus's booming voice cut across the lounge, laced with impatience. "Omar, where's that whiskey? And this time, bring the bottle. Some of us are in a hurry." Omar flinched, his shoulders tightening. His face paled slightly under the pressure. He immediately abandoned the pastry tray and Traore's request. "Coming, Mr. Marcus." "Right away, sir." He grabbed a fresh bottle of expensive whiskey and hurried towards the entitled group's table, his movements quick and anxious. Julian laughed again, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "See? That's how it's done. Some people just don't have the presence. You have to command service." Sylvie sniffed, honestly expecting water service when there are important people waiting for actual drinks. The priorities of these new hires are all wrong. Traore stood at the counter, his request for a simple glass of water completely forgotten, superseded by the demands of the entitled. He watched Omar scurry away, saw the stress etched on the young man's face, the eagerness to placate the loud, demanding customers. He saw the power dynamic at play, the wealthy demanding, the inexperienced staff bending under the pressure, prioritizing the loudest voices, the most obvious displays of wealth. He didn't blame Omar or Fatu. They were just trying to survive in a difficult job. He saw the system, the culture of entitlement, that made this kind of casual dismissal, this prioritization of perceived status over basic courtesy, the norm. He stood there, a quiet, still point in the swirling chaos of the lounge, observing it all with an intensity that few could perceive. His security detail, scattered but watchful, remained still, their hands near their jackets, their eyes scanning the room, waiting for his command, any sign that he had had enough. But Traore remained patient, a quiet storm gathering behind his eyes. He wasn't just a president waiting for a delayed flight. He was a leader, observing, absorbing the stark, often ugly realities of the world he moved in, the world he fought to change. Just as the air in the lounge felt thick with unspoken tension, the main lounge doors swung open again. But this time, the usual flow of passengers stopped abruptly. A palpable shift in the atmosphere began at the entrance, a wave of silence and attention that swept across the room, drawing every eye. Standing in the doorway were not typical travelers or lounge staff. There was a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his posture rigid with formal authority, his face serious, his eyes scanning the crowded lounge with an intense, purposeful gaze. Beside him stood a woman, equally formally dressed, holding a tablet and speaking quietly into a hidden earpiece. Behind them, two towering figures in crisp airport security uniforms stood guard, their presence commanding immediate respect and signaling that this was no ordinary arrival. They weren't just security. They were official protocol. The low hum of conversation across the lounge died down almost completely, as more and more heads turned, trying to understand the sudden, formal presence. The entitled group near Traore fell silent mid-complaint, their eyes fixed on the doorway. Marcus, his whiskey glass halfway to his lips, froze, his face a mask of confusion. Bernard straightened in his seat, his sharp eyes narrowed, assessing the situation. Sylvie stopped fanning herself, her expression shifting from bored disdain to startled curiosity. Julian's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of simple, wide-eyed wonder. Who were these people? And who were they here for? The man in the dark suit's intense gaze swept across the room, moving past the tables occupied by the obviously wealthy, past the clusters of business travelers, past the tourists near the windows. His eyes were searching, purposeful, looking for one specific person. And then, his gaze locked onto Traore, standing quietly near the service counter, still holding his paperback book, a picture of calm amidst the sudden, expectant silence. The man's formal posture didn't change, but his expression transformed. The intense focus remained, but it was now overlaid with a look of profound, almost startled respect, and a clear sense of urgency. He didn't hesitate for a second. He began to walk directly towards Traore, his pace quickening with every step, an undeniable aura of official importance radiating from him. The woman with the tablet followed closely, her eyes also fixed on Traore. The two security officers moved with them, subtly but efficiently, creating a clear pathway through the now silent lounge, gesturing for startled passengers to move aside with quiet, unquestionable authority. The entitled group watched, mesmerized, their earlier arrogance completely forgotten. Their faces were a tableau of confusion, curiosity, and a dawning, unsettling realization. This formal delegation, this air of importance, this clearing of the way, it wasn't for Marcus, or Bernard, or Julian, or Sylvie. It was for the quiet man in the simple clothes they had just mocked, dismissed, and treated like an inconvenience. The man in the dark suit stopped directly in front of Traore. He didn't extend a hand for a handshake, didn't offer a casual greeting appropriate for a lounge. Instead, he performed a short, sharp, formal bow, his head dipping low, a gesture of deep, institutional deference, a mark of respect that was unmistakable to anyone who understood the subtle language of power and protocol. "Mr. President," the man said, his voice clear, formal, and carrying effortlessly through the absolute stunned silence that had fallen over the entire lounge. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken weight, a thunderclap of reality in the artificial calm. Our sincerest and deepest apologies for the extensive delay and any inconvenience or discomfort you have experienced while waiting. Your aircraft is now prepared for immediate departure. We are here to escort you directly. The word echoed in the sudden vacuum of noise. President. The entitled group froze, their expressions shifting in real time from confusion to utter, gut-wrenching shock, then to a sickening realization of the magnitude of their error. Marcus's florid face drained of all color, turning a pasty white, his jaw going slack, the expensive whiskey forgotten in his hand. The diamond watch suddenly felt less like a symbol of power and more like a heavy, damning weight. Bernard's sharp eyes widened in disbelief, his carefully composed facade shattering, a look of horrified astonishment replacing his usual calculating expression. Sylvie's mouth fell open, her carefully applied makeup unable to conceal the sudden pallor of her skin, her designer handbag slipping from her nerveless fingers and hitting the plush carpet with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Julian's arrogant smirk was not just wiped away, it was obliterated, replaced by a look of stunned, horrified, almost childlike realization. At the service counter, the young trainee, Fatou, who had just delivered the expensive water to Sylvie's table and was still looking flustered, froze mid-motion. The bottle of water, the source of such recent complaint, slipped entirely from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly onto the counter and rolling onto the floor. Her eyes, wide with shock, darted from the bowing protocol officer to Traore's face, and in that moment, recognition slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. The face she had seen on television news reports, the one she hadn't recognized in his simple clothes, the man she had dismissed to get water for a demanding customer, it was him, the president. A look of profound horror, embarrassment, and fear flooded her features. Omar, the other young staff member, stood frozen, a rag still in his hand, his mouth agape, his eyes fixed on Traore with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. Traore, still holding his paperback book, met the eyes of the bowing protocol officer with a quiet acknowledgement. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you," he said again, his voice calm, quiet, utterly devoid of any hint of triumph, accusation, or gloating. He didn't spare a glance for the entitled group, frozen in their tableau of horror. He didn't look at the stunned, mortified staff. He simply turned and began to walk, escorted by the protocol team and the two security officers, who moved with swift professional purpose, clearing a path that now felt less like a walkway and more like a path of silent, absolute deference. His own security detail, previously blending seamlessly into the background, now moved with decisive efficiency, forming a tight, protective formation around him as they navigated swiftly towards a discreet, private exit, likely leading to a waiting vehicle on the tarmac or a private jet bridge away from the main terminal building, far from the madding crowd of the VIP lounge. As Traore was escorted away, his quiet presence leaving a vacuum of power and presence in his wake, the absolute silence in the lounge began to fracture. Whispers erupted, spreading like wildfire, fueled by astonishment, disbelief, and a growing sense of shared, horrified realization. Did he say Mr. President? Which president? There was no official arrival? That's him, Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. The one from the news. The one they were just, oh my God, they were mocking him. He was sitting right there, the whole time. And Fatou, she didn't recognize him. The entitled group remained frozen for a few more seconds, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and dawning, sickening horror. Marcus, Bernard, Sylvie, Julian. They had mocked a head of state to his face, dismissed a president as a commoner, an aid worker, someone who didn't belong in their exclusive space. They had treated him with open contempt, secure in their own bubble of perceived superiority, in front of staff who were too new, too overwhelmed, or too distracted by their own demands to recognize the quiet power in their midst. And he hadn't reacted. He hadn't argued, hadn't revealed himself, hadn't demanded they be removed or punished. He had simply absorbed their arrogance with a quiet dignity that now, in retrospect, felt less like passivity and more like an epic, silent, devastating rebuke. The lounge, moments before filled with their loud, confident voices, now felt heavy with the suffocating weight of their monumental gaffe. The low hum of conversation slowly resumed elsewhere, hesitant and hushed. But around their table, the air was thick with a palpable mixture of embarrassment, horror, and the profound, unsettling understanding of just who they had insulted. The delayed flight, the service complaints, the cost of their private jet waiting, all of it evaporated, replaced by the searing memory of their own appalling behavior and the image of the man with the paperback book, the man they had dismissed, being escorted away with the unquestionable, formal deference due to a president, leaving them alone with the bitter, metallic taste of their own entitled ignorance. Their exclusive, privileged bubble had just been quietly, powerfully, and utterly popped. And the silence that lingered around their table, filled only by the echoes of their own recent mockery, was deafening. They could only watch as the man they had scorned disappeared, leaving them to face the crushing weight of their own hubris.